Ellen Ray Greenberg. In Philadelphia on January 26, 2011, a schoolteacher was found deceased in her apartment with 20 stab wounds. Ellen Ray Greenberg, 27 years old and engaged to be married, was discovered by her fiancé, Sam Goldberg, after he forced entry through a locked door. 10 of the wounds were to her back and neck. She also had 11 bruises on her body. The Philadelphia medical examiner initially classified her passing as a homicide. Then everything changed. After consulting with police, the medical examiner changed the ruling to self-inflicted. The reason given was that there were no defensive wounds and the door to the apartment had been locked. Ellen's parents, Josh and Sandy Greenberg, refused to accept this classification. They argued that it was physically impossible for someone to inflict 10 stab wounds to their own back and neck. They pointed to evidence that seemed inconsistent with the self-inflicted determination. Ellen had been experiencing anxiety and was receiving treatment. But her therapy notes showed no indication of thoughts of ending her own life. In fact, the notes documented that she was planning for her upcoming wedding and showed no signs of wanting to harm herself. Her family emphasized that she was excited about her future, making wedding plans and looking forward to building a life with Sam. The locked door became a central point of controversy. The medical examiner cited it as evidence supporting the self-inflicted theory, arguing that if someone else had been involved, they could not have left with the door locked from inside. But the Greenberg family and their experts countered that the door's lock mechanism could be engaged from outside, or that Sam could have locked it when he left earlier that day. How could someone stab themselves in the back 10 times? The forensic details raised additional questions. The wounds included deep penetrations that would have caused immediate incapacitation. Medical experts argued that after the first few stabs, Ellen would have lost the physical capacity to continue. Ellen's parents began a long legal battle to have the ruling changed back to homicide, or at least undetermined. They filed lawsuits against the city, the medical examiner's office, and others they believed were responsible for mishandling the case. Their fight consumed years and significant resources as they sought justice for their daughter. A significant development emerged during the federal investigation. Dr. Marlon Osborne, the original pathologist who had classified Ellen's passing as homicide before the ruling was changed, said he acknowledged that the change from homicide to suicide was made at the request of the police department after their initial investigation. This statement from the initial examiner added weight to the family's claims that external pressure had influenced the change in classification. Sam Goldberg, Ellen's fiancé who had discovered her body, was investigated but never charged. He cooperated with authorities and maintained that he had left the apartment earlier that day for work, returning to find Ellen unresponsive. His account of events was examined thoroughly, but investigators found no evidence directly implicating him. The case against him remained circumstantial and inconclusive. Josh Greenberg spoke publicly about their fight. "We know Ellen didn't take her own life," he said in interviews. The family's conviction that something was wrong with the official ruling drove their years-long battle through the legal system. They believed that someone was responsible for Ellen's passing and that the truth had been obscured by the changed classification. The federal investigation, as of 2026, remained ongoing. Authorities were examining whether there had been improper coordination between the medical examiner's office and police, whether evidence had been mishandled, and whether the change in classification had been made for reasons other than medical evidence. The Greenberg family waited for results that might finally provide the answers they had sought for more than 15 years. Ellen's case became emblematic of broader issues in how questionable passings are investigated and classified. Advocacy groups focused on wrongful determination of self-infliction pointed to her case as an example of systemic problems. They argued that once a ruling is made, it becomes extremely difficult to challenge, even when evidence suggests the ruling may be incorrect. The 20 stab wounds remained the central mystery. No clear explanation existed for how someone could inflict such injuries on themselves, particularly to the back. The physical mechanics of such an act seemed to defy logic and medical understanding. Yet the official ruling stood, contested but unchanged, as the federal investigation continued. While Ellen's case raised questions about official classifications, the next would unfold on surveillance cameras. Missy Bevers. At Creekside Church of Christ in Midlothian, Texas, a fitness instructor arrived before dawn on April 18, 2016. Terry Missy Bevers, 45 years old and a mother of 3, was preparing for her 5 o'clock morning boot camp class. She entered the church building around 4:15. By the time her students arrived at 5, Missy had been struck multiple times and did not survive. The church's surveillance system captured something extraordinary. Footage showed an individual in full tactical gear resembling SWAT equipment walking through the church hallways approximately 30 minutes before Missy arrived. The person wore a helmet, tactical vest, and carried what appeared to be a hammer or similar tool. They moved through the building methodically, using the tool to break windows and damage property. The figure was estimated to be between 5 feet 2 inches and 5 feet 7 inches tall, with a heavy build. The surveillance showed the intruder's movements, but not the actual attack on Missy. The footage ended before she entered the church, meaning investigators had video of the suspect, but not of the crime itself. When Missy's students arrived for class, they discovered her in one of the church hallways, having sustained puncture wounds to her head and chest from what was determined to be a hammer. Police responded to the scene and began processing evidence. The cause of passing was established as blunt force trauma consistent with being struck by a hammer multiple times. The medical examiner documented puncture wounds that matched the type of tool seen in the surveillance footage. There was no evidence of theft. Nothing had been taken from the church or from Missy's belongings. The investigation quickly focused on the person in the tactical gear. Police released the surveillance footage publicly, hoping someone would recognize the individual's distinctive gait or body language. The video went viral, generating thousands of tips. People analyzed the way the person walked, their build, their movements. Armchair investigators across the country offered theories about who might be behind the tactical gear. Was this a targeted attack or a random encounter? Missy's husband, Brandon Bevers, told investigators and media that he believed it was random. While Brandon Bevers initially hoped it was a random burglary, police warrants later revealed that the family had been experiencing internal conflicts, and the investigation extensively probed the possibility that Missy was specifically targeted by someone known to her. He suggested that someone had broken into the church intending to vandalize or burglarize it, and Missy had arrived unexpectedly, startling the intruder. The encounter then turned fatal. This theory would explain why the person was already in the building and why nothing was stolen. Their original plan was interrupted by Missy's arrival. But others questioned whether it could be random. The timing seemed too coincidental. Someone breaking into a church at the exact time when Missy would arrive for her regular Monday morning class. The tactical gear suggested planning and preparation, not a spontaneous break-in. The methodical way the person moved through the building suggested they were comfortable there, perhaps familiar with the layout. Investigators pursued multiple angles. They interviewed Brandon Bevers extensively, examining his relationship with Missy and his activities on the morning of her passing. They looked into Missy's personal life, her work, her friendships, searching for anyone who might have a motive to harm her. They examined whether any of her fitness class participants or people connected to the church had reason to target her. More than 3,000 tips came in from the public. Each one had to be investigated and either pursued or eliminated. People called in suggesting that the person in the footage resembled someone they knew. Others provided theories about motives or connections. The volume of tips was both a blessing and a challenge. It showed public engagement, but also created an enormous workload for investigators. Despite the surveillance footage, the thousands of tips, and extensive investigation, no arrest has been made. The person in the tactical gear has never been identified. The tactical gear remains a key piece of the puzzle. Where did it come from? Was it genuine law enforcement equipment or items purchased to create that appearance? If purchased, where and when were they bought? These questions could potentially lead to the suspect. But so far, no definitive answers have emerged. Forensic experts have analyzed the gait visible in the surveillance footage. The way someone walks can be distinctive, influenced by injuries, physical characteristics, or habits. Gait analysis suggested possible characteristics of the person under the gear, but without someone to compare against, analysis could only provide general information. The choice of weapon, a hammer or similar tool, suggested someone comfortable with such implements. It was not a firearm, which might indicate the person wanted to avoid the noise of gunshots or preferred a different method. The puncture wounds indicated forceful strikes, suggesting either significant strength or determination. Missy's family and friends struggled with the lack of resolution. Brandon Bevers continued speaking publicly about the case, participating in media interviews and appeals for information. He described Missy as a devoted mother and fitness instructor who helped people improve their health and lives. Her passing left 3 children without a mother and a community without answers. From a church in Texas, the mystery shifts to a Colorado home and a man who opened his door to danger. Oki Al-Kite. In Aurora, Colorado, a man placed an advertisement to rent a room in his home in May 2004. Oki Al-Kite, 53 years old, owned a house and was looking for additional income through renting. On May 22nd, someone responded to the advertisement using the name Robert Cooper. That person arrived at Kite's home for what should have been a routine rental showing. What happened next would become one of Colorado's most disturbing unsolved cases. Kite was found deceased in his basement, bound with duct tape and having sustained multiple stab wounds. The scene suggested he had been restrained and subjected to significant suffering before being ended. The nature of the injuries indicated this was not a quick act, but rather something prolonged and deliberate. Investigators determined that Kite had been bound and incapacitated before the fatal injuries were inflicted. The person calling himself Robert Cooper had provided contact information that turned out to be false. The phone number led nowhere, and the name appeared to be an alias. Whoever had come to view the rental room had used a false identity specifically for this purpose. This suggested premeditation. The person had planned to commit a crime and had taken steps to avoid identification. Kite's truck was stolen from his property, along with his wallet and phone. The theft of these items suggested robbery as a possible motive. However, the level of restraint and the nature of what had been done to Kite suggested something beyond simple theft. Someone looking to rob a homeowner typically would not spend the time and effort to bind and inflict prolonged harm. A crucial piece of evidence emerged shortly after the crime. Surveillance footage from an ATM showed someone using Kite's debit card. The person wore a ski mask, deliberately concealing their identity. They withdrew money from Kite's account using the card that had been in his wallet. The footage provided general build and height of the suspect, but no facial features that could aid identification. The investigation revealed disturbing details about the crime scene. The level of preparation and control suggested someone who had committed similar acts before or who had planned this meticulously. Investigators looked for similar cases in the region and nationally, checking for patterns that might indicate a serial offender. They found no definitive matches, though some cases shared elements that warranted examination. What drove someone to inflict such harm? The apparent lack of personal connection between Kite and his assailant suggested a random targeting. Kite had simply placed an advertisement, and someone responded with intent to harm. This randomness made the case more difficult to solve. Without a personal connection, investigators could not pursue relationships, conflicts, or motives rooted in shared history. The suspect could be anyone who saw the advertisement. Kite's girlfriend described him as a kind man who was simply trying to earn extra money. He had no known enemies, no conflicts that would explain someone targeting him. His life had been ordinary, marked by work and relationships, but not by the kind of drama that might lead to such an ending. The randomness made his passing all the more senseless. Years passed without significant progress. The case grew cold as leads dried up and the trail went nowhere. Then, in 2020, advances in forensic technology provided new possibilities. DNA phenotyping, a technique that uses DNA to predict physical appearance, was applied to evidence from the crime scene. The DNA phenotyping sketches were released in 2017 via Parabon Nanolabs, and updated, aged versions were provided to the public in 2023. These sketches were released to the public, showing a Caucasian male with specific facial features predicted by the DNA analysis. The technology could not provide an exact image, but offered a scientifically based approximation of the person's appearance. The sketches generated new interest in the case. Law enforcement hoped that someone would recognize the predicted features and provide information about a person matching that description. The FBI included Kite's case in their Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, giving it national visibility and access to resources for tracking similar patterns across jurisdictions. As of 2026, the case remains unsolved. No one has been arrested or charged. The DNA evidence exists. The composite sketches are public, and investigators continue pursuing leads. But Robert Cooper, whoever he actually is, has not been identified. The name remains an alias used by someone who walked into Al Kite's home and committed an act that defies easy explanation. The case raises troubling questions about vulnerability. Kite was engaging in a common practice, renting a room to generate income. There was no obvious way for him to know that Robert Cooper had malicious intent. While Al Kite's case involved a stranger at the door, the next would begin with a mother and her young son on a mysterious road trip. Timothy Pitson. In May 2011, a mother checked her son out of school in Aurora, Illinois, saying there was a family emergency. Amy Fry Pitson took her son Timothy, who was in kindergarten, and told school officials she needed him for urgent family matters. Over the next 3 days, Amy and Timothy went on a road trip through Illinois and Wisconsin. They visited a zoo, a water park, and stayed at various hotels. Security footage from these locations showed them together, apparently enjoying their time. On May 14th, Amy was found deceased in a hotel room in Rockford, Illinois. She had taken her own life. But Timothy was not with her. Investigators discovered a note Amy had written. The note said that Timothy was safe with people who loved him, that he would never be found. The cryptic message launched an investigation that continues more than a decade later. Police began searching for Timothy immediately. They reviewed Amy's car, her credit card, transactions, and surveillance footage from the places she had visited. They tracked her movements during the 3-day period, trying to determine where she might have taken Timothy. The timeline showed visits to tourist attractions, but no indication of where he might have been left or with whom. Amy's family was contacted and investigated. No one in the family had Timothy, and all claimed they had no knowledge of Amy's plans. Her ex-husband and Timothy's father, Jim Pitson, was devastated by both losses, Amy's passing and his son's disappearance. He cooperated fully with investigators, providing any information he had about Amy's state of mind and activities leading up to the trip. What had Amy planned during those 3 days? Investigators examined Amy's mental health history. She had struggled with depression and had previous episodes requiring treatment. Friends and family said she loved Timothy deeply, but had been experiencing personal difficulties. The decision to take him out of school and go on a trip appeared to be spontaneous, not something she had discussed with anyone beforehand. The note's wording suggested Amy believed she was protecting Timothy from something. She claimed he was with people who loved him, implying she had arranged for his care. But investigators could find no evidence of any such arrangement. No one came forward claiming to have Timothy. No family members or friends acknowledged being part of any plan. The note appeared to be Amy's way of ensuring Timothy would not be found. But whether he was actually safe remained unknown. Extensive searches were conducted in areas Amy had visited. Police used dogs, helicopters, and ground teams to search parks, wooded areas, and other locations where she might have left Timothy. They checked homeless shelters, foster care systems, and any place where a young person might turn up. Nothing provided a lead to his location. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children became involved. They created age-progressed images showing what Timothy might look like as he grew older. These images were distributed widely, posted in public places, and shared through media. The hope was that someone who had seen Timothy, or who was caring for him, would recognize him and come forward. Years passed without any confirmed sighting. In 2019, there was a brief moment of hope. A teenager in Kentucky claimed to be Timothy Pitson, saying he had escaped from captors. The claim received national attention, and investigators rushed to verify it. DNA testing quickly proved the teenager was not Timothy. The false claim was devastating to Jim Pitson and others who had hoped for resolution. As of 2026, Timothy remains missing. He would now be a teenager. Whether he is alive and being cared for by someone, or whether something happened to him during those 3 days, remains unknown. From a missing person to a series of unsolved endings that terrorized California. The Zodiac Killer. In Northern California between 1968 and 1969, a series of attacks terrified the San Francisco Bay Area. The person responsible called themselves the Zodiac, communicating with newspapers through letters and ciphers. The confirmed victims numbered 5, though the Zodiac claimed in letters to have taken 37 lives. The discrepancy between confirmed and claimed victims remains one of many mysteries surrounding the case. The first confirmed attack occurred on December 20th, 1968, in Benicia, California. 2 teenagers, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, were in a parked car when they were approached and shot. Both were ended. The attack appeared motiveless, a random targeting of young people in a parked vehicle. On July 4th, 1969, another couple was attacked in Vallejo, California. Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau were in a parked car when someone approached and opened fire. Ferrin did not survive. Mageau survived and provided descriptions of the attacker. though the details were limited due to darkness and the trauma of the attack. On September 27, 1969, at Lake Berryessa, a couple was approached by someone wearing an executioner-style hood. Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were picnicking when the hooded figure appeared, claiming to be an escaped convict who needed their car. The attacker then bound them and used a knife to inflict serious injuries. Shepard passed away from her wounds. Hartnell survived and provided detailed descriptions of the encounter and the attacker's appearance. The final confirmed Zodiac ending occurred on October 11, 1969, in San Francisco. Paul Stein, a taxi driver, was shot in his cab. The Zodiac took a piece of Stein's shirt as a trophy and later mailed it to newspapers to prove his involvement. This attack differed from the others. It occurred in an urban setting rather than a remote location. And the victim was not a couple, but a taxi driver. Why did the pattern change with Paul Stein? The Zodiac's communications with newspapers became as famous as the attacks themselves. The letters included ciphers, coded messages that he challenged police and the public to solve. Some ciphers were eventually decoded, revealing messages that provided little useful information about the Zodiac's identity, but demonstrated his desire for attention and recognition. One cipher was solved in 1969 by a schoolteacher and his wife. It contained a rambling message about hunting humans being the most thrilling experience and claiming that those he ended would become his subjects in the afterlife. The message was disturbing, but provided no names or identifying information. Other ciphers remained unsolved for decades until a team of code breakers cracked one in 2020. The case attracted intense investigation from multiple law enforcement agencies: San Francisco Police, Vallejo Police, the Napa County Sheriff's Office, and others coordinated efforts to identify the Zodiac. They pursued thousands of tips and investigated numerous suspects. Physical evidence from the crimes was limited. Some fingerprints, some handwriting samples from the letters, and witness descriptions that were frustratingly vague. Arthur Lee Allen emerged as the primary suspect. He was investigated extensively during his lifetime, with search warrants executed at his residence. Allen matched some aspects of the witness descriptions. He had been in the areas where attacks occurred. He had made statements to acquaintances that suggested knowledge of the crimes. But investigators could never gather enough evidence to charge him. Allen died in 1992 from a heart attack. His passing closed the door on potentially solving the case through his confession or further evidence connecting him to the crimes. In 2002, San Francisco police compared a partial DNA profile from the Zodiac letters to Arthur Lee Allen's DNA. The profile did not match Allen, which many experts believe effectively ruled him out as the author of those specific letters. Later, a new theory emerged, connecting the Zodiac to another famous unsolved case. Researchers analyzing the Zodiac's codes claimed they had found links to the Black Dahlia case from 1947 in Los Angeles. The theory suggested the same person might be responsible for both. However, the age discrepancy, the Black Dahlia case occurred 20 years before the Zodiac attacks, made this theory problematic. As of 2026, the Black Dahlia connection remains unconfirmed and widely questioned. Other suspects have been proposed over decades. DNA databases have been checked for familial matches. Handwriting experts continue analyzing the letters. Yet the Zodiac's identity remains unknown. While the Zodiac terrorized the Bay Area decades ago, the next case would bring horror to a suburban shopping center. Lane Bryant Massacre. At a Lane Bryant clothing store in Tinley Park, Illinois, employees and customers were conducting normal business on February 2, 2008. Just before opening time, around 10:30 in the morning, a man entered the store. He was described as an African-American male, approximately 6 feet tall, heavy build, wearing dark clothing and a jacket. What happened next would become one of Illinois' most notorious unsolved cases. The man herded 6 people, 5 employees and 1 customer, into a back room of the store. He appeared to be conducting a robbery, demanding access to the store's safe. The 6 people complied, offering no resistance. They were bound and forced to the floor. Then, despite their cooperation, the man began shooting. 5 women lost their lives in that back room. Rhoda McFarland, 42, the store manager. Jennifer Bishop, 34, an employee. Carrie Hudek Chiuso, 33, an employee. Sarah Safransky, 22, an employee. Connie Woolfolk, 37, a customer. 1 employee survived, having been shot but managing to survive her injuries. She would become the key witness in the investigation. The survivor provided crucial information to investigators. She described the shooter in detail: his appearance, his clothing, his voice, his actions during the robbery. She recalled how he had seemed nervous, how he had become agitated when accessing the safe took time, how he had suddenly begun shooting after the victims were already restrained and compliant. Why did he shoot when they had cooperated? Police responded to emergency calls and secured the scene. The Lane Bryant store became a massive crime scene, with investigators processing evidence, interviewing witnesses from nearby businesses, and reviewing any available surveillance footage. A composite sketch was created based on the survivor's description and released to the public. The sketch showed a heavy-set African-American man with distinctive features. The image was distributed widely across Illinois and nationally. Billboards featured the sketch. Media coverage was extensive. A reward fund was established, eventually reaching $100,000 for information leading to arrest and conviction. Investigators pursued multiple theories about motive. Was this simply a robbery that went wrong? The shooting seemed excessive for a robbery. Most robbers do not open fire on compliant victims who have given them access to money. Had the shooter panicked? The survivor indicated he seemed nervous, suggesting this might have been his first robbery or that something unexpected had triggered his decision to shoot. Another theory centered on whether one of the victims might have been specifically targeted, with the robbery serving as cover for what was actually a planned execution. Investigators examined the lives of all 5 victims, looking for connections to criminal activity, personal conflicts, or anything that might make one of them a target. They found nothing suggesting any victim was involved in anything that would lead to being targeted this way. As of 2026, no one has been arrested for the Lane Bryant massacre. The case remains unsolved despite extensive investigation, thousands of tips, and the substantial reward. The composite sketch has been shown to millions of people. Someone somewhere likely recognizes the man in the sketch. But if they do, they have not come forward. The families of the 5 victims have lived with unanswered questions for more than 15 years. They know how their loved ones passed and where, but not why or by whom. The randomness of it, a shopping trip or work shift that ended in tragedy, makes processing the loss even more difficult. From suburban Illinois, the mystery shifts to California's San Gorgonio wilderness. Jared Negrete. On a Boy Scout hiking trip in July 1991, a group set out to climb Mount San Gorgonio in California. Jared Negrete was with the group, participating in the organized outdoor activity. The mountain, at over 11,000 feet, was challenging terrain requiring careful navigation and preparation. The scout troop had appropriate equipment and experienced leaders. Everything about the trip followed proper protocols for youth outdoor activities. During the hike, Jared became separated from the group. The circumstances of how he became separated remain unclear. In group hikes, particularly with young participants, it is crucial that everyone stays together. Somehow, Jared ended up alone on the mountain when the group realized he was missing. They immediately began searching and contacted authorities. Search and rescue teams responded quickly to the mountain. They deployed ground teams, helicopters, and search dogs. The San Gorgonio wilderness is vast and rugged, with dense forests, steep slopes, and numerous places where someone could become lost or injured. The search teams covered enormous areas, calling out for Jared and looking for any sign of him. Rescuers found some of Jared's belongings during the search. His camera was discovered, and when developed, the film showed self-photographs he had taken. These images showed him on the mountain, providing some information about his path and state of mind. The photos did not show distress or immediate danger. They appeared to be normal pictures someone might take during a hike. Other items belonging to Jared were also recovered. His camera and his shoe prints were found in different locations on the mountain. The dispersal of these items suggested he had been moving through the area, perhaps trying to find his way back to the trail or to civilization. But despite finding his belongings, searchers did not find Jared himself. What happened after he became separated from the group? The search continued for weeks, with volunteers joining professional rescue teams. Hundreds of people combed through the wilderness, checking every trail, every clearing, every area where someone might seek shelter or where a body might be located. The mountain size and the difficulty of the terrain made comprehensive searching nearly impossible, but teams made extensive efforts. As the search stretched on with no sign of Jared, the leading theory became that he had succumbed to the elements. The mountain's elevation meant temperatures could drop significantly, especially at night. Someone without proper shelter could develop hypothermia quickly. The terrain included dangerous areas where falls were possible. The wilderness included wildlife that could pose threats. Any number of natural hazards could have led to a tragic outcome. But without finding Jared, investigators could not confirm what had happened. The case was classified as a disappearance with the assumption that he had become lost and perished on the mountain. However, the lack of remains meant this remained a theory rather than a confirmed conclusion. Some held out hope that Jared had somehow survived and left the mountain, though as years passed, this became increasingly unlikely. Jared's family struggled with the absence of closure. They knew he had been on the mountain and that he had become separated from his group. They had his camera and belongings, but they did not have Jared, and they did not know his final moments or where on the vast mountain he might be. The uncertainty prevented them from fully processing their loss. Over the years since 1991, hikers and search teams have occasionally looked for Jared's remains. The San Gorgonio wilderness continues to be actively used by outdoor enthusiasts, and there remains a possibility that someone could stumble upon evidence that would finally provide answers. But the mountain is vast, and much of it remains difficult to access and search thoroughly. The case prompted discussions about youth outdoor program safety. How do organizations ensure participants stay together? What protocols should be in place when someone becomes separated? The Boy Scouts and other outdoor programs reviewed their procedures in light of Jared's disappearance, implementing additional safety measures for group hikes in challenging terrain. For those who knew Jared, the mountain itself became a memorial. Some returned to San Gorgonio to hike in his memory, to search for any sign of what happened, or simply to feel connected to the place where he was last known to be. The wilderness that was meant to be an adventure and learning experience became instead the site of an enduring mystery. If you've made it this far and enjoyed deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, Hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. While Jared's case remains a wilderness mystery, the next would begin with a phone call that ended in silence. Brandon Swanson. In Marshall, Minnesota, a college student was driving home from a party on May 14, 2008. Brandon Swanson, 19 years old, was attending Minnesota West Community and Technical College. Around midnight, his car went into a ditch on a rural road. The vehicle was not badly damaged. Brandon was uninjured. He called his parents to ask for help getting the car out of the ditch. Brandon's father, Brian Swanson, answered the phone. Brandon explained where he thought he was, near Lind, Minnesota, a small town not far from where his parents lived. Brian and his wife Annette got in their car and drove toward the location Brandon described. They stayed on the phone with him as they drove, trying to coordinate meeting up. Brandon told his parents he could see the lights of a town in the distance. He decided to walk toward those lights while waiting for his parents to arrive. His father could hear him walking, breathing heavily as he moved through what sounded like rural terrain. They talked about where they each were, trying to figure out why they were not seeing each other, despite both believing they were in the same area. The conversation continued for approximately 47 minutes. Brandon was walking, his parents were driving and searching. They flashed their headlights, hoping Brandon would see them. He flashed his car's lights, but his parents could not see them. The disconnect between where Brandon thought he was and where he actually was became increasingly apparent. He was not near Lind, as he had believed. At approximately 1:54 a.m., Brandon exclaimed, "Oh shit!" before the line went dead. His parents remained in the area for hours, but the final verbal contact occurred just before 2 a.m. His father tried calling back immediately. The phone rang, but Brandon did not answer. Subsequent calls went straight to voicemail, suggesting the phone's battery had died or the phone had been damaged. Brian and Manu. Annette drove around searching for hours, calling Brandon's phone repeatedly, but there was no response. What happened in that final moment? When daylight came, the Swanson family contacted law enforcement. Police began searching for Brandon and his vehicle. They eventually located his car, but it was not near Lind where Brandon thought he was. The vehicle was found in a ditch off a gravel road near Taunton, which is roughly 20 miles from Lind. The search concentrated on the area around Mud Creek, a tributary of the Yellow Medicine River. This explained why Brandon and his parents could not find each other. They were searching in completely different areas. The car's location provided a starting point for the search. Brandon had been walking from Taunton, not from Lind. His path would have taken him through rural farmland, with fields, ditches, and the Yellow Medicine River in the area. Search teams focused on the terrain between where the car was found and the direction Brandon would have been walking. Extensive searches were conducted. Volunteers joined professional search and rescue teams in combing through fields, checking riverbanks, and examining any location where Brandon might have fallen or sought shelter. Search dogs were brought in to track his scent. Helicopters provided aerial views of the area. Divers searched the Yellow Medicine River and nearby bodies of water. Despite these efforts, no trace of Brandon was found beyond his abandoned vehicle. Theories developed about what might have happened. One possibility was that Brandon had fallen into the Yellow Medicine River. The river was in the area where he was walking, and if he had fallen in, particularly in darkness, he could have been swept away by the current. The "oh shit!" he exclaimed could have been his reaction to stepping into water or losing his footing near the riverbank. Another theory suggested he might have fallen into an abandoned well or cistern. Rural Minnesota has numerous old wells and farm structures that might not be immediately visible, especially at night. A fall into such a structure could explain his sudden disappearance and why searches did not locate him. The possibility of foul play was also considered. Could someone have encountered Brandon on that rural road and harmed him? The sudden exclamation and disconnected phone could suggest he saw or encountered something threatening. However, investigators found no evidence of another person being involved. There were no reports of suspicious vehicles or individuals in the area that night. Brandon's case led to the creation of Brandon's Law in Minnesota. The law requires police to begin immediate searches for missing adults under 21 in certain circumstances, rather than waiting 24 hours. Previously, law enforcement often waited before beginning searches for adult missing persons, assuming they had left voluntarily. Brandon's case demonstrated that immediate action could be crucial. His parents, Brian and Annette, became advocates for missing persons. They worked with legislators to pass Brandon's Law and participated in searches for other missing individuals. As of 2026, Brandon Swanson remains missing. Periodic searches of the area continue, particularly when water levels allow access to areas normally underwater. While Brandon vanished on a Minnesota road, the next case would begin with mysterious visitors at a Maryland apartment. Kanika Powell. In Maryland, a young woman returned home from her work in August 2008. Kanika Powell, 28 years old, was an Army veteran who held a security clearance in her work. She lived alone in an apartment complex in Prince George's County. In the days before her passing, she had experienced something unusual. Visitors to her apartment who claimed to be people they were not. A few days before August 28th, someone came to Kanika's door claiming to be from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The person showed what appeared to be FBI credentials. Kanika, trained to be cautious due to her work background, was suspicious. She did not let the person into her apartment. After the visitor left, she reported the incident to actual FBI agents, who confirmed they had not sent anyone to her residence. The next day, another suspicious visitor appeared. Someone came to her door claiming to have a package delivery. Again, Kanika was cautious. Something about the situation did not seem right. She did not accept the supposed package, and the person left. The pattern of suspicious visitors put Kanika on alert. She told friends and family about these incidents, expressing concern about who these people were and what they wanted. On August 28, 2008, Kanika was in the hallway of her apartment building when someone shot her. Neighbors heard gunshots and found Kanika in the hallway, seriously wounded. Emergency responders transported her to a hospital, but she passed away from her injuries the following day. The shooter fled the scene and was not immediately identified. Police began investigating Kanika's background to understand why someone might target her. Her work involved security clearances and access to sensitive information. Investigators examined whether her passing could be related to her work, whether she had access to information that made her a target. They found no evidence of espionage or workplace-related motives, but the possibility could not be entirely dismissed. The suspicious visitors in the days before the shooting became a central focus. Who were these people claiming to be FBI agents and delivery personnel? Were they connected to the shooting? The timing suggested they were. Someone appeared to be attempting to gain access to Kanika or her apartment before ultimately shooting her in the hallway. Why would someone go through such elaborate preparation? Investigators discovered a connection to another case. A man named Sean Green had been shot in a similar manner in the same area. The circumstances shared enough similarities to suggest the same person might be responsible for both attacks. Both victims were shot in their apartment areas. Both cases involved what appeared to be targeted attacks rather than random incidents. A suspect emerged in both cases: Jason Scott, a man with a criminal history who had connections to the area. Investigators examined whether Scott could be responsible for what appeared to be a series of targeted attacks. The theory suggested a possible serial pattern, with Scott selecting victims for reasons that remained unclear. However, evidence connecting Scott definitively to either case was insufficient for charges. Kanika's family described her as cautious and professional. Friends said she was the type of person who followed protocols and took security seriously. Her army background had trained her to be aware of her surroundings and to question suspicious situations. She had done everything right. She had not let the suspicious visitors into her apartment. She had reported the incidents to proper authorities. Yet despite her caution, she was still targeted. The method of attack, shooting her in the hallway rather than in her apartment, suggested the perpetrator knew Kanika was not allowing people into her residence. Unable to gain access through deception, the shooter waited for an opportunity when Kanika was in a Tasimuano common area. This adaptation indicated planning and determination to reach her specifically. Forensic evidence from the scene was limited. The shooter left no weapon behind and apparently left no useful physical evidence that could lead to identification. Witnesses in the apartment complex provided general descriptions, but nothing specific enough to identify the shooter definitively. The person had acted quickly and fled before residents could get a clear view. As of 2026, Kanika Powell's case remains unsolved. No one has been arrested or charged. Jason Scott remains a person of interest, but without sufficient evidence for charges. From Maryland, the focus shifts to Colorado and one of the most discussed unsolved cases in American history. JonBenet Ramsey. In Boulder, Colorado, on December 26, 1996, a mother discovered a ransom note in her home. Patsy Ramsey found the handwritten note on the stairs of the family's residence. The note demanded $118,000 for the safe return of her daughter, JonBenet. Patsy immediately called police, reporting that her daughter had been taken. Officers responded to the Ramsey home and began processing the ransom note while also searching for any sign of JonBenet. Hours later, JonBenet's father, John Ramsey, found her body in the basement of their own home. She had been bound and had sustained head trauma. The medical examiner determined the cause of passing was asphyxiation combined with a head injury. The case immediately became one of the most scrutinized in American criminal history. JonBenet was known in the area for participating in beauty pageants, and images of her in pageant attire circulated widely in media coverage. The combination of her public profile, the unusual ransom note, and the discovery of her body in her own home created intense public interest. Investigators faced immediate questions. Why would someone write a ransom note but not actually take the victim from the home? The note's presence alongside JonBenet's body in the basement suggested either an intruder whose plan went wrong or someone staging a scenario to mislead investigators. The amount demanded, $118,000, was notably close to a bonus John Ramsey had recently received, a detail that raised questions about who would know that specific figure. The investigation quickly focused on the Ramsey family themselves. Patsy and John became subjects of intense scrutiny. Boulder police examined whether one or both parents could be responsible for JonBenet's passing and the ransom note. The theory suggested that an accident or intentional act within the family was being covered up with an elaborate staging to appear like an intruder had been involved. Handwriting analysis of the ransom note became crucial evidence. Experts examined whether Patsy Ramsey could have written the note. Results were inconclusive. Some analysts thought the handwriting shared characteristics with Patsy's writing, while others found significant differences. The note itself was unusually long for a ransom demand, containing phrases and details that seemed odd for a kidnapping scenario. The crime scene presented challenges. The house had been walked through by multiple people before Jean Benet's body was found, potentially contaminating evidence. Friends and family had been present after police arrived. The body had been moved by John Ramsey before investigators could properly process the scene. These actions, while understandable from grieving parents, complicated forensic analysis. Physical evidence from the scene included foreign DNA. DNA was found on Jean Benet's clothing that did not match family members. This evidence became central to the intruder theory. Someone outside the family had been present and had contact with Jean Benet. However, questions arose about when and how that DNA was deposited. Could it have been from manufacturing or from innocent contact before the night in question? Years of investigation followed. The Boulder Police Department and the District Attorney's Office sometimes pursued different theories, creating tensions in how the case was handled. A grand jury was convened in 1999 to examine evidence and determine whether charges should be filed. The grand jury reportedly voted to indict the Ramsey parents, but the district attorney at the time declined to sign the indictment, believing the evidence was insufficient for conviction. In 2008, DNA testing advanced enough to perform more sophisticated analysis of the foreign DNA. The results led the district attorney to send a letter to the Ramsey family formally exonerating them based on the DNA evidence. The letter acknowledged that the DNA pointed to an intruder and that the family had suffered under suspicion for years. However, not everyone involved in the investigation agreed with this exoneration, and debate continued about what the DNA evidence actually proved. Patsy Ramsey passed away from cancer in 2006, never seeing the formal exoneration or resolution of her daughter's case. John Ramsey continued advocating for further investigation and testing. He has repeatedly called for additional DNA analysis using newer technologies, believing that advances in forensic science could finally identify the person responsible. In late 2023 and throughout 2024, the Boulder Police Department, in collaboration with the Colorado Cold Case Review Team, began utilizing forensic genetic genealogy, FGG, on the remaining touched DNA samples found on Jean Benet's clothing, a process that continues into 2026. From a case that captured national attention, the focus shifts to a desert discovery of multiple victims. West Mesa Bone Collector. In Albuquerque, New Mexico, a woman walking her dog in February 2009 made a disturbing discovery. On a mesa on the western edge of the city, she found what appeared to be human remains partially exposed in the desert soil. She immediately contacted authorities, triggering an investigation that would uncover one of New Mexico's most significant serial cases. Police responded to the location and confirmed that the remains were human. They began a methodical excavation and search of the area, working carefully to preserve any evidence. As they dug and searched, they found more remains, and more. Eventually, the total reached 11 individuals, along with an unborn child. The West Mesa had been a burial ground for multiple victims. Forensic analysis determined that the victims were primarily young women, most of Hispanic descent, ranging in age from 15 to 32. Their remains showed they had been buried sometime between 2001 and 2005. The bodies had been in the ground for several years before their discovery, making identification and determining cause of passing more difficult. Many of the victims had been involved in activities that put them at high risk. Several had histories that brought them into contact with dangerous situations and people. This commonality suggested the person responsible was targeting individuals from a specific vulnerable population. The victims' circumstances meant their disappearances had not always triggered immediate searches or substantial investigation at the time they went missing. The investigation became one of the largest in Albuquerque's history. Detectives worked to identify all the remains and to establish timelines for when each victim had last been seen alive. They interviewed families, reviewed missing persons reports, and tried to piece together how these 11 individuals had ended up in a mass grave on the West Mesa. Who was responsible for taking so many lives? 2 suspects emerged as primary persons of interest. Lorenzo Montoya was one focus of investigation. Lorenzo Montoya was killed in 2006 by a teenager he had attempted to attack. While he remains a primary suspect due to his proximity to the site and violent history, forensic links between his DNA and the West Mesa victims have remained inconclusive as of 2026. Joseph Blay became another significant person of interest. He had a criminal history and had been convicted of other serious offenses. His background and activities during the relevant time period made him a candidate for investigation. But like Montoya, the evidence connecting Blay to the West Mesa victims remained insufficient for charges. Investigators continued examining his potential involvement, but lacked the definitive proof needed to bring a case to prosecution. The burial site itself provided limited forensic evidence. The desert conditions and the length of time the remains had been there meant much potential evidence had degraded. DNA was extracted from the remains for identification purposes and for comparison against potential suspects. But finding useful trace evidence that could identify the person who buried the victims proved difficult. A $100,000 reward was established for information leading to the identification and arrest of the person responsible. The reward represented both the seriousness with which authorities viewed the case and their hope that someone with knowledge would come forward. Tips came in and were investigated, but none led to the breakthrough needed to solve the case. The families of the victims faced a complex grief. Many had not known what happened to their loved ones for years. The discovery on the West Mesa provided answers about where they were, but not about who was responsible or why. Some families said they appreciated finally knowing, even as the lack of justice remained painful. Others struggled with renewed trauma from the discovery and subsequent investigation. The case raised questions about how missing persons from vulnerable populations are investigated. Several of the victims had been reported missing, but their cases had not received extensive investigation at the time. The tendency to view such disappearances as people choosing to leave, rather than as potential crimes, may have allowed whoever was responsible to continue for years. Advocacy groups pointed to the West Mesa case as evidence that all missing persons reports deserve thorough investigation, regardless of the missing person's background. As of 2026, the West Mesa case remains unsolved. No one has been arrested or charged. The investigation continues with detectives still assigned to pursue leads. From New Mexico desert to a Bavarian farmstead where an entire family met their end. Hinterkaifeck murders. On a farm in Bavaria, Germany, something was wrong in the days leading up to March 31st, 1922. The farmer, Andreas Gruber, told neighbors about strange occurrences. He had found footprints in the snow leading from the forest to his farm, but no footprints leading back. Someone had walked to the farm and apparently stayed. He also heard footsteps in the attic and noticed that a newspaper he had not purchased appeared at the farm. Andreas did not call police about these incidents. Perhaps he thought they were explained by some reasonable cause. Or perhaps he intended to handle whatever was happening himself. His previous maid had quit recently, claiming the farm was haunted. A new maid, Maria Baumgartner, was scheduled to begin work on March 31st. That day, 6 people were present at the Hinterkaifeck farm. Andreas Gruber, 63 years old, the owner. His wife Cecilia, 72. Their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, 35. Victoria's 2 young offspring, one named Cecilia and one named Josef. And Maria Baumgartner, 44, the newly arrived maid. All 6 would be found deceased within days. On April 4th, neighbors noticed that none of the family had been seen for several days. No one from the farm had attended church, which was unusual. No one had collected mail. Smoke was not coming from the chimney. Concerned, neighbors went to the farm to check on the family. What they found was horrific. The 6 bodies were discovered in various locations around the farm. 4 were found in the barn: Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and young Cecilia. They had been struck with a mattock, a farm implement similar to a pickaxe. The injuries indicated violent, repeated strikes. The 2 youngest, Joseph and Maria Baumgartner, were found in their beds in the house, also having been struck with the mattock. The timeline suggested all 6 had been taken within a short period on March 31st. Maria had arrived that day and was found in her sleeping quarters, suggesting she was targeted shortly after arriving or during the night. The others appeared to have been lured to the barn or attacked there while doing evening chores. What made the case particularly disturbing was what investigators found next. Evidence suggested that someone had remained on the farm for several days after the passings. The livestock had been fed and cared for. Food had been eaten in the house. Smoke had been seen coming from the chimney on days after the family was no longer alive. Whoever committed the acts had stayed at the farm, living there while the bodies were present. Why would someone do this? The investigation examined numerous suspects and theories. One focus was Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a neighbor who had been romantically involved with Victoria and was suspected of being the father of young Josef. Schlittenbauer was among those who discovered the bodies, and some aspects of his behavior raised questions. However, he was eventually cleared based on alibis and lack of definitive evidence. Other theories centered on family conflicts and financial matters. Andreas Gruber had been involved in disputes with relatives and neighbors. Some theorized that Victoria's late husband, who had reportedly perished in the First World War, might actually still be alive and responsible. This theory suggested he had returned to the farm and taken revenge for some perceived wrong. But no evidence supported this speculation. The possibility of a transient or stranger was also considered. The footprints Andreas had noticed suggested someone unfamiliar with the farm had been approaching. Perhaps this person had sought shelter and, when discovered or confronted, had attacked the family. The decision to stay afterward could reflect desperation for food and shelter during what would have been cold, early spring weather. Forensic investigation in 1922 was limited compared to modern standards. The bodies were examined, but DNA analysis and other techniques available today did not exist. Physical evidence from the scene was collected but could not be analyzed with the precision now possible. The mattock used in the attacks was presumably taken by the perpetrator and never recovered. More than 100 people were interviewed during the investigation. Neighbors, relatives, business associates, and anyone who might have had contact with the family were questioned. Tips and theories were pursued, but no arrest was ever made. As years passed, witnesses passed away, evidence degraded further, and the case grew cold. Theories about the Hinterkaifeck case continue to be discussed more than a century later. But without modern forensic evidence, without living witnesses, and without the physical crime scene, definitive answers may never be possible. From a century-old mystery in Germany, the focus returns to modern America and a young woman who vanished from her Florida home. Jennifer Kesey. In In Orlando, Florida, a young woman prepared for work on the morning of January 24, 2006. Jennifer Kessie, 24 years old, worked in finance and lived alone in a condominium complex. She spoke with her boyfriend on the phone around 10 o'clock the previous evening, and that was the last confirmed contact anyone had with her. When she didn't arrive at work and did not answer calls, co-workers and family became concerned. Jennifer's family contacted her workplace and learned she had not shown up. They went to her condominium and found it locked, with her car missing from its parking space. Inside the condo, everything appeared normal. Her purse, identification, and other personal items were present. The bed appeared slept in. There was no sign of struggle or forced entry. Jennifer had simply vanished sometime between the phone call with her boyfriend and when she should have left for work. The next day, Jennifer's car was found. It was parked at another condominium complex about a mile from where Jennifer lived. The vehicle was locked, and when police examined it, they found Jennifer's belongings inside: her cell phone, briefcase, and valuables. The car appeared to have been driven to this location and deliberately parked, but by whom remained unknown. Surveillance cameras at the complex where the car was found captured crucial footage. Video showed a person parking Jennifer's car and walking away. However, the footage was frustratingly unclear about the person's identity. The surveillance footage from the Huntington on the Green apartments shows the person of interest, POI, walking behind a wrought iron fence. Due to the camera's frame rate, the POI's face is perfectly obscured by a fence post in every single frame. A coincidence often cited as one of the most frustrating one-in-a-million occurrences in forensic history, investigators could determine general height and build, but could not see facial features. The person in the footage was estimated to be between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 5 inches tall. The walk and body language suggested someone who knew they were being recorded or who was deliberately remaining obscured. They did not run or act suspiciously in obvious ways, but walked calmly away from the vehicle after parking it. Where had Jennifer been between her condo and where the car was found? Investigators examined Jennifer's life for any indication of threats or conflicts. They found none. She had no known enemies, no ex-partners who were stalking her, no financial problems that might lead to desperate action. Her relationships with family, friends, and co-workers were positive. She was described as responsible and safety-conscious. Nothing in her background suggested why someone would target her. Attention focused on the condominium complex where Jennifer lived. Construction work was being done at the complex, with workers present during the day. Some of these workers had noticed Jennifer and had made her uncomfortable with their attention. She had mentioned to family that the workers would sometimes stop and stare as she walked to her car. Whether any of these individuals were involved in her disappearance became a key investigative question. Forensic examination of Jennifer's car and condominium provided limited evidence. DNA and fingerprints were collected, but in the car especially, it was difficult to separate Jennifer's normal traces from potential evidence left by whoever drove the vehicle after taking her. The condo showed no signs of forced entry, suggesting Jennifer either left voluntarily or someone she knew had been involved. Jennifer's parents, Drew and Joyce Kessie, became tireless advocates for their daughter. They fought to keep the case active and to maintain pressure on investigators to pursue every possible lead. They appeared in media, created websites dedicated to finding Jennifer, and worked with various organizations focused on missing persons. Their determination kept Jennifer's case in public awareness when it might otherwise have faded from attention. In 2025, significant developments emerged. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement became involved in the case, bringing fresh resources and expertise. New DNA analysis was conducted on evidence from the car and other items. The analysis used techniques that did not exist in 2006, offering possibilities that earlier examinations could not provide. The DNA testing reportedly narrowed the list of potential suspects. While specific details have not been released publicly, the Kesse family indicated that the results gave investigators specific individuals to focus on. Whether these individuals were among the construction workers at Jennifer's complex or had other connections to her remained undisclosed. Drew Kesse stated publicly that hope remained alive. After 20 years of searching, he and his wife continued to believe that Jennifer's case could be solved. The DNA evidence represented the most significant progress in years, offering a potential path toward identifying who was responsible for Jennifer's disappearance. As of 2026, the case is considered active rather than cold. Investigators continue working with DNA results and pursuing leads. The person seen in surveillance footage has never been identified with certainty. From a case with renewed hope for resolution, the final story involves a young person lost to the failures of protective systems. Relisha Rudd. In Washington, D.C., a young person was living in a homeless shelter with family members in early 2014. The shelter was meant to provide temporary housing for families experiencing homelessness. At the shelter, she encountered Khalil Tatum, a janitor who worked at the facility. Tatum began taking an unusual interest in the young person, an interest that should have raised immediate alarms but did not trigger adequate protective responses. Tatum began taking her away from the shelter, claiming he was taking her to appointments or on outings. Her family members at the shelter allowed this, apparently trusting Tatum or not understanding the danger. School officials noticed absences but accepted notes claiming she was ill or had appointments. The adults who should have been protecting her failed to recognize or act on the warning signs. On March 1st, 2014, Relisha was seen on surveillance footage with Tatum at a motel. The footage showed them together, confirming that Tatum had taken her from the shelter and was keeping her in a motel room. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Relisha alive. What happened after that remains unknown. It took days before anyone reported Relisha missing. The delay was catastrophic. By the time authorities began searching for her, the trail was days old. Tatum was identified as the person who had taken her, and police began searching for both of them. They found neither initially. Then authorities discovered that Tatum's wife had been found deceased. She had been shot, and the circumstances suggested Tatum was responsible. The discovery intensified the search for Tatum and raised fears about what might have happened to Relisha. If Tatum had harmed his wife, what might he have done to the young person he had taken from the shelter? Police found Tatum in a park. He had taken his own life. His passing meant he could never be questioned about Relisha's location or what happened to her. Investigators searched his belongings, his vehicle, and any locations he was known to have visited. They found no sign of Relisha. Massive searches were conducted across Washington, D.C. Police, volunteers, and search and rescue teams combed through parks, wooded areas, and abandoned buildings. Kenilworth Park, where Tatum's body was found, received particularly intensive searching. The park's size and dense vegetation made comprehensive searching difficult, but teams made extensive efforts. No trace of Relisha was found. As of 2026, she remains missing. The prevailing theory is that Tatum harmed her and concealed her remains somewhere they have not been discovered. But without finding her, investigators cannot confirm what happened or provide her family with definitive answers. The case exposed severe failures in protective systems. How had a janitor been able to repeatedly take a young person from a shelter without proper oversight? Why school officials accepted excuses for absences without verification? Why had family members allowed Tatum such access? Each system that should have protected Relisha failed, and those failures cost her safety and likely her life. The definitive investigation into the case, the Through the Cracks podcast, and subsequent reporting was finalized in 2021 and 2022. However, 2025 marked the 11th anniversary of her disappearance, prompting a renewed Metropolitan Police Department review of the Kenilworth Park search data. Advocates for vulnerable populations pointed to Relisha's case as evidence of how easily those experiencing homelessness can fall through cracks in protective systems. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.